I'm sorry. But I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful. But we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate. We think too much and feel too little. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness. Without these qualities, life will be violent. And all will be lost. All will be lost. Do not despair. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die. Dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. Will return to the people. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world to do away with greed. Now let us fight to free the world, to fulfill that promise. Let us all unite.
Welcome, folks, to Weaponization Nation. Oh, radio program. It is February the 12th of 2014. And I'd like to welcome my very special guest today, Patrick Jordan, who joined us a few weeks ago, a couple weeks ago, to talk about the what I deem to be the essential topic of the decade, of the year, of the century, of the millennia, which is prions, and all that revolves around what these little buggers can do and where they come from and how they affect our bodies, our mental state, and how they are the cause or have a causal relationship with just about every modern disease that's been created, from dementias to cancers to others. Now, we're going to get into some fairly bizarre topics tonight, probably, because we're going to go a little further into Patrick's repertoire to talk about some things such as rabies and other forms of diseases that have been cultivated and recreated to serve the human body in a more evil capacity. So I'd like to welcome Patrick Jordan of vaccinefraud.com. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hi, Clint. Thanks for having me. Hello, listeners.
I'll tell you, I hope people understand that vaccine fraud, that's an interesting title that you chose for your website, because you're not saying vaccine danger, like most people out there, including myself, have always been talking about, all the crap that's in vaccines, all the things that'll harm you that just have an instant effect on your health and well-being. But vaccine fraud really, Patrick, really refers to the fraud that is being perpetrated by pretending that vaccines actually help the body, while in the meantime it's really just a delivery system for a nightmarish future.
You know what? I feel like I should just sit back and let you talk, because that's what I would say. That's perfect. In fact, right now, keep talking, because I want to pull up a quote from 1889 by Edgar Cruikshank when he did the history and pathology of vaccination. He actually went to Jenner's archives and reviewed all the material, and he's like my inspiration for calling it fraud, because they were like shocked in 1889 that vaccination would even take off, because it was so ridiculous on the face of it. So keep going. I want to pull up this quote. It's very telling.
I'll tell you what I was thinking, because I actually listened to a past interview of yours where you were basically talking about, how to build a zombie, how to build a zombie race, literally. And again, we read the definition of zombie. If you didn't get a chance to listen to Patrick and I the last time, it was show number 70, and it was on the 31st of January. I highly recommend that as a prerequisite to the show, because maybe some of the things we talk about today might not shine through if you didn't hear that particular show. But I was thinking, as I was listening to one of your other interviews, you were talking about the human body And of course, I've been studying the human body, and I think we're on the same wavelength here. That the best thing that I can call the human body is a living compost pile, where you have to just keep basically feeding it decaying matter and flesh in order to absorb and to keep the compost cycle going. And of course, the excrement and all that, which we don't need to get into. But, because basically, what is the body? It's simple. Water and minerals. That's what makes up the body. What is water? It's minerals. It's oxygen and it's hydrogen. Right? So the whole body, if you go back to the Bible and you read, it talks about vessels. And really what the body is a vessel for whatever the mind is. Oh, nice. Whatever that energy structure is in the mind that keeps everything going. Your mind is like, if you will, your mind is like, the brain, I should say, is like a circuit board. And it has all these different minerals, which are, again, metals. We're talking about metals here. We're practically machines. We're talking about metals. Although, of course, the minerals come in gas form with argon and that, and they come in forms like oxygen. But what we're really talking about is an electrical circuit board we call the brain that runs the machine that is organic, that's made up of basically, like I said, compost. And it's called a vessel. It's very similar to us building a car to transport our bodies. What we're really doing is transporting, again, through the vehicle, we're transporting our brain, our essence, our being, whatever that is, our soul. And in order to do that, of course, we're constrained to the body, the machine that carries around. And I was thinking about this, Patrick, and what we're really talking about are just the if we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty here, what we're talking about with these people who are messing with prions and who are trying to fundamentally alter the body, we're really just talking about transhumanism. We're talking about the fundamental change of the human body to create, first of all, a machine / humans, and then ultimately to just get rid of the flesh altogether, because all you're really talking about is a body of minerals. When you're talking about a robot, you're talking about a metallic creature that carries around the essence of being, which is this electrical impulse, this soul, and as long as it has a brain to control everything, and of course now they're putting microchips into the brain which can control all of this. I'm starting to think of all this stuff. I'm going crazy thinking about just how they are altering our bodies because they are just a vessel. Even in the Bible, it's just a vessel. Just a vessel. That's all it is.
I've got the quote for you. So if you will allow me to just back up to your first point about the fraud, then we'll get into the topic of the vessel. This is the very end of Edgar March Cruikshank's History and Pathology of Vaccination, Volume 1. And he says, in regards to smallpox, there can be no doubt that ere long a system of compulsory notification and isolation, so we're talking quarantine, will replace vaccination. Indeed, I maintain that where isolation and vaccination have been carried out in the face of an epidemic, it is isolation which has been instrumental in staying the outbreak, though vaccination received the credit. Unfortunately, a belief in the efficacy of vaccination has been so enforced in the education of the medical practitioner that it is hardly probable that the futility of the practice, meaning it's fraudulent, it doesn't work, he spent an entire book saying that, will be generally acknowledged in our generation, though nothing would be more redound to the credit of the profession and give evidence of advance made in pathology and sanitary science.
Oh, wow, he called it like it is. Oh, the only problem is the Rockefellers came along and silenced everything, huh? We'll be back, folks. Stay with us for more Patrick Jordan from vaccinefraud.com.
was a solution. Did you see the frightened ones? Did you hear the falling bombs? Did you ever wonder why we had to run for shelter when the promise of a brave new world unfurled beneath the clear?
Welcome back, folks, to Corporation Nation. And what an interesting nation we are in. So please, Patrick, continue. We're basically saying that, you know, it was a good title for your website because literally, you're pointing to the fraud, not the dangers as much, but to the absolute fraud that is hiding this, not only a pseudoscience, but one of the most darkest and devious sciences that there are, which is this. It's the perfect way to test on the population anything you want to. That's really the bottom line.
And you're going to find that this is the final sentence that I didn't get in before the break, the final sentence that closed out his volume 1, and this says it all. It is more probable that when, by means of notification and isolation, smallpox is kept under control, vaccination will disappear from practice and will only retain an historical interest. This is the guy, Edgar March Cruikshank, that went into Jenner's archives and said this man was a fraud and he had the complicity of the entire parliament that awarded him in adjusted dollars like $1 million to perpetrate the fraud of vaccine. So this was a conspiracy at the highest levels in England. And Edgar March Cruikshank, famous bacteriologist and well known for bringing to the public's attention tuberculosis in the milk supply. He was made famous for that. He said vaccination should just be a faded memory in history. And look at where we're at. Your work, Clint, has shown that vaccination is the vehicle by which they create all of this cascade of physical damage to these quote-unquote vessels.
Yeah, and just so people understand, let me give an example of something other than what we are talking about. Let's talk about the many, many different ways of doing just that. Let's talk about something called squalene. Now, squalene is a very, very popular what they call adjuvant. What is an adjuvant? Well, again, when you go back into the history, you'll see that adjuvants are basically just a fraud. What was an adjuvant? Well, they noticed that if a certain vaccine was actually contaminated with what they referred to back then with just dirt, basically, that the vaccine would have a higher immune response. Well, yeah, if you're going to take dirt and put it directly into the blood system, then yeah, your body's going to fight. Your body's going to fight whatever you inject. So what do? All right, so there's this health craze out there called squalene. You actually eat the squalene. Now, remember, eating and injecting are not the same things. This is why when someone argues, well, if you just have good nutrition, then everything will be okay. No, that's not how it works, actually, because you're directly putting something into the blood where it then carries and is sometimes programmed to be carried by little nanobots to certain parts of the body. So squalene will, okay, let's just say, okay, your body already produces squalene, right? It's used to basically lubricate, if you will, the joints, the cartilage of the body. So what do? We take supplements of it. Well, they use it as an adjuvant. Remember what an adjuvant is? Dirt. It enhances the immune response. Doesn't mean it's working to vaccinate or create an antibody for the specific thing. It just means it kicks your body into high gear. Well, what is your body doing? It says, oh my gosh, I'm going to play the part of the body now, just so you know. The body says, oh my God, what's happening here? Oh, wait, that's squalene. But it's not my squalene. I didn't make it. it's very similar to the same squalene I make, but what am I going to do? Because it's so similar, the only way I can fight it is to fight my own squalene. So I actually have to create an antibody against the squalene that I actually produce in order to fight the foreign substance that's not the correct squalene. But it's so similar. So eventually, what develops? Well, how about Gulf War syndrome? They call squalene one of the most insidious chemical weapons ever devised because it's so similar to the human body's production of squalene that the antibodies that are produced from what is supposed to be an adjuvant literally will destroy the body's own production of squalene. It would be like running your car without oil, basically. Oh, wow. All of your joints just go. All of a sudden, you develop they basically linked it to Gulf War syndrome because the injections that they gave to the military men that went over to Gulf War all came back with similar symptoms to multiple sclerosis and lupus and AIDS, basically. And, yeah, I mean, it's just your body attacking your body's own functions. And that is what's in vaccines. When you inject porcine zona pellucida, again, we talked about this. What is that? It's the ovary of a pig. You inject that into horses or into people. It prevents spermatogenesis. It prevents the sperm from getting to the correct size. It literally sterilizes people. It literally sterilizes, according to them, 90% of the horse population simply by injecting part of a body, a foreign body, whether that's a liquid like squalene or a part minced up, whether it's a monkey kidney, whatever it is, it's going to cause a reaction in your body. Sorry, that's just I'm done.
No, you've opened it up. So here's what happens. When I do research for my books, sometimes I'm up early into the morning, 1, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, chasing down links. And I happen to just fall into the Weissman. It's spelled with a W, and I'll send anybody that emails me a link to this institute, the Weissman Institute in Israel, where they codify diseases by their genetic correlations. And when I fell across that, I could not stop. Of course, the AI knows what I do, when I do it, and the associations that I'm able to make, and it shut down my internet connection multiple times. But I kept pulling it back up. I got, different connections every time. I tried to keep ahead of the AI, and I found the most incredible key to what you're talking about, Clint, that these genetic trees that they were making that correlated diseases had what was called a superfamily. So it was like a family tree, but the overarching pattern of the superfamily was called allograft rejection. And that needs to be explained because they change words and terms purposely to confuse us.
Well, now, just to be clear, allografting is actually human-on-human grafting. It's still a foreign part of another human, whereas xenografting is actually an alien or another species. Is that right?
That's you got it in one, but for me, I don't even make that distinction because somebody else's human body, whether it is the diploid cells, again, a name change to occult the fact that it is aborted fetal tissue. It doesn't matter if it's Henrietta Lacks's cervical cancer cells. Those things, although they are allograft, meaning same species, they're still xenografts in my mind because they ain't me, man.
Well, yeah, they could be a different blood type. Your body could reject it just because it's a different blood type. I mean, there's so many ways that your body could fight against that. Absolutely. Hey, we're going to take another break. We'll be back with Patrick Jordan of vaccinefraud.com. And I really want to talk about rabies. Several zombie genre movies have been made about rabies. So we'll be back with that.
First of all, let me take just a moment to thank you for allowing me back into your homes. If this is your first time with us, let me extend a personal invitation. Let's build a happy little cloud. Let's build some happy little trees. There are no limits here. You start out by believing here is in your own world. You're the creator. Find freedom on this canvas. Believe that you can do it. Because you can do it. You can do it. Relax, let it flow. Think like water. Relax, let it flow. You can go on and on and on. We don't make mistakes. We just have happy accidents.
Welcome back, folks.
Do anything that you want to do.
We are talking with Patrick Jordan today, and I got to tell you, this stuff is nuts. And to the average listener, I suppose it would sound nuts if this is your first time hearing about it. But I assure you that this is based on both mine and Patrick's intense research. And we're talking hours and hours and hours of reading patents and other documents and historical evidence. And you know, we're both convinced that this is the plague, the man-made plague of the century, and I think we're both advocates that this really needs to be taken seriously at this point. In other words, it needs to stop being secret, because you know, like you said, any doctor and nurse I ask has no idea what a prion is, and that's very dangerous when you consider that they're the ones treating all of the dementia cases that are caused by these, the cancers and everything else. They don't know that the protective proteins that are protecting the cells from getting cancer are being destroyed by these protein, these prion. It's very, very important. So please continue. We're talking about how the body reacts to foreign contaminants, basically. And a foreign contaminant can be an aborted fetal tissue of an aborted human baby.
The Weizmann Institute gave the undeniable association that allograft rejection led to autoimmunity. But, Clint, the disease trees that they built, and I'll read you one on rabies. I get a kick out of having a conversation with you because you always get it in one, and we build on each other's data. So we'll get to rabies. The autoimmunity from allograft did not make sense to me because I haven't had an organ transplant. I haven't had a blood transfusion, but my body is attacking itself. Why might that be? Because when I was a child, and unfortunately by my own choice as an adult, I was vaccinated. I was allo and xenografted. And the xenograft can come in with something as simple as a bacteria or a virus, because those are foreign to the human body, and they are injected into the system that sees anything that comes in through a sting, if you will, as the enemy, an invader, something that has to be neutralized. So this is how it all begins. And to tie it back to Cruikshank and the fact that vaccination is fraudulent, fraud always leads to harm. Whether it is physical or mental harm, it exists, and that harm often leads to death. So we are then implicating these actions with malice aforethought and murder. And that's why I chose the name vaccine fraud, because to me that says it all. This is the domino effect of how it all falls down. So here's rabies. This comes from the Weizmann Institute, and I'll read it really fast because there's that much to it in this family tree. Rabies has a genetic disease equivalency with encephalitis, herpes, poliovirus receptor, leukemia, schizophrenia, eczema, celiac disease, rhodopsin receptors that allow hearing of voices, Siberian tick-borne encephalitis that is also related to Japanese encephalitis that is related to tyrosinemia, hepatitis B, Ebola, Newcastle virus, limbic encephalitis, which is equal to breast cancer, stiff person syndrome, ovarian cancer, leukemia, and it all filters down to measles. And when I'm like reading this stuff at 3 o'clock in the morning, my eyes are blurry and I'm still like uttering expletives because I can't believe that a genetic tree of disease associations would have that kind of constellation of things.
Oh, now what do you mean when you say it's a genetic tree?
This is the way that the Weizmann Institute classifies diseases with their, and the way I understand it, and I could be wrong, the genetic expression or susceptibility to diseases, they build a tree and say these are related to this within the human species, that they have crossover characteristics.
So they can actually, pardon me, they can actually work together. They're not opposed to each other. They can be intermingled.
It's almost as if we have a susceptibility to them. And see, I always come at this from a conspiratorial end. It's as if we were engineered through these things that were injected into us, which are tracked by lot numbers in electronic medical records. It's almost as if we were engineered susceptibilities to a constellation of diseases, and then all they have to do is track their success rate of, in 1963 we injected this baby with this vaccine, this lot number, and all of a sudden they got X disease because we knew it, because we inserted that gene code of susceptibility.
I see. So basically what you're saying, Patrick, is that we're all test tube babies. We are all walking test tubes, essentially. We just get different things get injected and mixed and mingled, and then there's a record of it. And what we die from is is basically okay, well, we probably don't want to go that route. Maybe we should mix this, and this. And that's going to be the next... well, it's funny because I remember the Japanese encephalitis vaccine. One of the things I mentioned in my documentary, actually, is why the heck in America would you get a Japanese encephalitis that only comes from a mosquito that cannot live anywhere else but Japan? Why would you promote that in America? And, well, now it's starting to make sense.
Well, you don't have to go any farther. You know, when you and I talk about things, we actually go to the sources for this information. You don't have to go any farther than like a Nova documentary. I think that the title was Bioweapons. And they had a bioweapons engineer on there, and he was saying there are two goals of biological warfare: to disable, so the enemy is too sick to fight, and anybody that's been in Vietnam knows that it's more sought after for the enemy to wound a soldier, because then you tie up 3 more people to try to take care of him, and they're out of the fight, than it is to kill somebody outright. But the two options of a biological kill or attack is disable or kill. And Japanese encephalitis, there was another encephalitis that they had specifically that they had engineered. Venezuelan equine horse encephalitis. They engineered it on purpose, and they did the testing in the southeastern states like Florida and the Keys, mainly on low-income people, mainly on black people, and then they just monitored the hospital admissions. You know, it's called proof of concept.
Yeah. It's also interesting to note that prions have been the subject, without really people understanding, prions have been the subject of several sitcom, TV shows, dramas, basically. Just to give you an example, in case anybody's a fan of this show, I am not. I've never seen the show in my life. want to have nothing to do with its star, Kiefer Sutherland, whose father is actually very heavily into United Nations and Social Security and crap. Won't get into that. But in season 7 of the show 24.
Oh, wow.
A bioweapon was developed and tested in a brutalized African nation under the heel of a delusional despot. It turns up in the U.S. In the shipyards of Alexandria, Virginia, on the outskirts of Washington. Jack Bauer, the gallant hero, hijacks a flatbed truck. Basically, it goes on to this, and basically, he's exposed to the weapon because he breaks into the thing and he breathes in the prions. Basically, they call them pendoprine. We'll be back, folks. Stay with us. Do we have a problem with our poisons? Will we find a cure? Who knows? But in season 7 of the show 24, basically they have a weaponized prion is what it is. The shipping container's damaged. Gas escapes from a canister. Guy takes the brave hero, what a bunch of crap, takes a breath, unfortunately, and he's afflicted by this disease. Of course, they don't say it's prions. Then someone all of a sudden getting real sick, real deathly, having seizures and all the signs of prion disease. Someone injects him with what sounds like a drug called pendoprine, which controls his shaking. Again, as a prion, very much think of ALS. And he needs to inject himself every 2 hours. The terrorists capture him. Of course, the terrorists, in this case, we know is our own government. But, okay, we'll say the terrorists. They capture Jack, hoping to harvest his brain.
Oh, man.
And spinal cord. Where do prions exist most? They're all over the body, but, yes, they do their thing in the brain. And it's interesting that it's the spinal cord, because that might be something we want to look at, and so that they can rebuild their bioweapon, basically, to get their weapon stocks back. In other words, they want to harvest the prions. Still having seizures. Finally, another thing you might want to look at, his daughter comes along and saves the day by somehow offering him an injection of stem cells. And that's how the miraculous show 24 continues into the next season. Thank God our hero is alive and survives prion disease. Again, they don't call it prion disease, but it's just basically what it is, what they're talking about. And it's also been in several other shows and scientific movies. And also there's a show called Helix right now on the Science Fiction Channel that I purposefully watched because I knew what it was going to be. And I was exactly right. It's about digging out the nucleus of exactly what we talked about last show, digging out the nucleus or the DNA structure of the influenza virus and replacing it with something else to transmit a different form of disease. That's what the show is based on. So it's all over the media is the point. They tease you with it. They tell you about it, and yet they never tell you what it actually is, which is prion disease.
You have a unique ability to segue right into the next topic. You had brought up rabies, and I'm listening to you talk about good old Jack Bauer and his brain and spinal cord, and I'm thinking, well, geez, oh Pete, rabies targets and travels, because the nervous system has a circulatory system associated with it. It travels the spinal cord and brain. It is a central nervous system disease that congregates primarily in the brain and the salivary glands, because that's the way it can transmit itself if you get the furious form, because there's actually 2 forms recognized in animals. One is called the dumb form, where the animal becomes completely lethargic, frightened, and immobile. and the other form is the furious, where it just bites anything that's in its mouth path. Now, rabies as a virus, and if you've ever seen a representation of it graphically, or you've seen an electro-micrograph of it, it looks like a bullet. I'm not kidding you. It has the shape of a bullet, and it is considered a larger virus, and so it is susceptible to these monsters being able to do what I call husking it out and duct taping in new genetic material. So this bullet can be made into something else. They can ghost it out, put new stuff in, and deliver it. Your body sees it as the antigens on the surface of the rabies bullet, but the juicy prize inside happens to be a completely different delivery system.
One thing I forgot to mention, because Jack is such a hero, is that he contemplates, because apparently they figure out nothing can kill this thing. Jack contemplates self-incineration. I just wanted to throw that out there, too, because we know that prions can survive temperatures up to, 700 degrees. They can't be drowned. They can't be frozen. They can't be burned. Self-incineration.
And so, Clint, I'm on like my 12th or 13th book right now, and I can't even keep the information straight in my own head. So I had to pull up my book. It's called The Rise and Fall of Kingdom Plantae.
Yes,
and on page 87,
book I have. Yes.
Yeah, excellent. On page 87, it talks about rabies, and I had to refresh my memory because there's so much water under the bridge.
Mm.
It's easier for rabies to move through unmyelinated nervous tissue. So it really begs the question of whether the use of live measles virus vaccines was not a priming mechanism to facilitate the introduction of rabies into a world population.
Now, again, you just said that, and I'm trying to remember in my documentary, demyelination of the sheaths was a primary destructive side effect of vaccine. I can't remember. Seems like it was the cervical cancer vaccine.
Well, measles will do that because this ties exactly in to the first half of this broadcast. Molecular mimics. The measles virus looks like the myelin sheath protein. And because your body can only make about 100,000 antibodies, it's got a very small repertoire. If they cross over, if it makes an antibody to the measles virus that kind of looks like your own nervous tissue, that is going to cross over and start attacking your own vessel. Let's get to that term. The vessel is going to break down because they shot something foreign into you. And it always comes back to them and the fraud. We're giving you this measles vaccine to protect you from measles. Well,
Patrick. It just occurred to me.
Insulation on the Romex, man.
Well, dude, you just sorry. We're getting to be friends now, so I'm calling you dude. You just remind, because before you said these things were being used in materials science. So could this also be a reflective of the fact that they're trying to create? I mean, it's hard to put it into words. Like I said, transhumanism. I mean, if you're trying to fuse mechanical parts into the human body, even on the nano level, then this would be a necessary trial period to see what happens, when you introduce these. So if you're actually trying to create a material, it's hard to put into words, but I think maybe you know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about, because I had Dr. Judy Wood that wrote Where Did the Towers Go? She said she had to create her own language because there was no language like dustification. for what happened to the World Trade Towers.
Sure.
In physics, there were no words to describe what happened, so she made up her own words. So I came up with, for like the Morgellons agenda, building a ship inside the bottle. And what you do is you take little bits at a time with a very long, thin probe, and you put it inside the bottle, and you just start gluing pieces together, and it is a long and tedious and patient-requiring process. And so let's just look at this. Anybody that's worked with electrical circuits or electronics knows that if you have an insulator and you want to connect to that line, you have to strip the insulation to have access to that conductive path. And so what is the autism epidemic? It is demyelination. That's what causes the damage to the nervous system. Unmyelinated nervous tissue allows rabies to travel through it better. What would be more advantageous than to insert a nano circuit that requires physical contact with its particular components within that nanocircuit to living tissue? So, you know, your own fluids would provide the electrolytes. It would provide a media through which the power to this circuit might operate.
Sure, because again, we're talking about metals. We're talking about minerals, which is what the body is made of. Patrick, stay tuned. We will take our long break and be back.
Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel. Who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men. Machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are men. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful. Let us use that power to make this life a wonderful adventure. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world to do away with greed. A world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Do not despair. The hate of men will pass and dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. Let us all unite.
Welcome back to the Corporation Nation radio program. My guest today is Patrick Jordan from vaccinefraud.com, fraud being the key word there. I'd like to give a shout out to the folks in the chat room tonight. The chat room can be found at corporationnation.chatango. That's CHATANGO.com. Some of the good people in there would love to have you join them. Always some stimulating links and stuff in there, actually. I've been very happy with what's going on in there. So, Patrick, going into this rabies thing, and you explain what the rabies, you know, quote-unquote virus, whatever, looks like, but I was just thinking, you know, I worked in Hollywood. I used to put sound to movies and games, and the last project I worked on, I got to work on Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5, which were both basically zombie genre games, and, you know, you make them sound real nasty and bloody and gory. But I'm realizing as I'm watching some of these other movies out there that come out, well, the one that comes to mind is 28 Days Later, that the theme is not that people are coming back from the dead, because that's ridiculous, but that they are actually being infected with a weaponized version of the rabies virus. In fact, the mainstream, really, really popular movie that just came out a couple of years ago, it had an all-star cast. It had Brad Pitt. I can't remember the name of it, but it was basically about a similar outbreak. And at the end of the movie, they went to show that it was actually it was pigs that were eating where above in the rafters there were bats, and the bat droppings were getting into the food of the pigs, and that, basically spelled rabies. So, transmissible rabies to humans. Of course, they're trying to make you think it's in the food supply. But again, we kind of know better that these things are being transferred, as you say, grafted through bodily injections. So what is rabies? How is it being weaponized? I know you talk a lot about that in your book.
That is the $64,000 question. What is rabies and where did it come from? Because there is a maxim of Sun Tzu, the guy that wrote The Art of War. Know yourself, know your enemy. If you don't know your enemy, man, you are screwed. So we talk about rabies all day long, and I can tell you that its glycoprotein coat looks like the shape of a bullet, that it is just a negative RNA strand of genetic material. And it's like, that doesn't tell us squat. Mm. Where did it come from? I have consulted just, high-powered books, textbooks that are nothing but rabies. And all they will tell you is the transmission pathways between animals. And in the book that we're talking about that I wrote, Rise and Fall of Kingdom Plantae, I exposed the fact that through a Navy grant, there was a fellow that did research on how to aerosolize rabies. Now, everybody needs to know that I paraphrase and I reinterpret the data, because they're not going to come out and say, oh, yeah, this study that your tax dollars funded was about how we can aerosolize rabies so that we can infect the entire world population and get away with it. Between the lines of this document was, we will look for rabies transmission in these bat caves, find out how it is accomplished, then we will adapt it to a vaccine, because we want to protect people.
That's what government does, That's actually its main function, is protection. But, yeah, exactly. Of course, with protection, you're also subject to all the pains, penalties, taxes, licenses, extortions, and exactions, and in this case, biological weapons.
And so, after all this high-level investigation, they still couldn't say where the rabies came from. And so they made disclaimers that it didn't come from beetles, flesh-eating beetles. It didn't come from mites or ticks or this or that or other thing. And, I adopt kind of like a Russian peasant attitude, that whatever Pravda says, the opposite is probably true. And it arose through the biosphere, through biting insects, which are vaccinators, by the way. That is the definition of a vaccine, is a biting or piercing insect penetrates a victim's body and inserts a foreign organism into it. That's a vaccination. So my assumption is that rabies arose through the biosphere and went from species to species to species, and you'll find this is the big lie of Pasteur, and he's the guy that gave us the rabies vaccine. His lie was, I am going to, and he literally forced it into the brains of dogs and rabbits and cows to try to, what he called, attenuate it. But when you go cross species, all pathogens increase in virulence. So while he was celebrated as like a savior, the guy was actually a bioweapons engineer. There's no other way to interpret this. And this is what I present in my books. I go, here is what they say. Here are the facts. Here is what it really leads to, because if we go back to that super tree that I was talking about, that's going to show up in my third book on food. It's called Human Beans, Beans. The chart that I show from Weizmann started with rabies, went to encephalitis, and had this long list, but it ended at measles. Now, see, in 2008, I put together the rabies compilation for Rise and Fall Kingdom Plante. Here we are in 2013 when I'm putting this chart together from new data, and I've got a clear line. I'm like pointing at my screen. I'm so like excited. You know, it's like I'll hold my phone up so you can see it. Rabies to measles. Why? Because measles demyelinates the nerves, lets it travel, lets the nanotech transhuman agenda in, lets the Morgellons in, lets the Prions have full access to nervous tissue. It's all there, Clint. That's why you and I say this is the holy grail. This is the mother lode of the plague of all mankind for time.
Man, unfortunately, is the plague of man because man is experimenting on man with these things. Now, you mentioned Morgellons. What is, in your opinion, what is that? Is that actually something that's falling from the sky, or is that something that's developing because of these injections?
Oh, man. I love your little trigger words because I have something very important for this hour to talk about with respect to the atmosphere. Now, I have Morgellons, and I call them victims. It is not a label of denigration. A victim is somebody that's like cold-cocked from behind by a robber and, you know, either injured or killed and have, like, all their possessions stolen from them.
Sure. I mean, my whole audience is victims. I'm a victim. You're a victim. We're all victims, and we don't even know it, so it's okay. We'll be back, folks. Stay with us.
Scientists have been battling to understand what this unappealing object is all about. What the object is all about.
Information in the form of energy streams in simultaneously through all of our sensory systems in the form of energy. And then it explodes into this enormous collage of what this present moment looks like, what it feels like, and what it sounds like. It explodes into this enormous collage. And in this moment, we are perfect. We are whole, and we are beautiful.
It appears rather gruesome, wrinkles like a walnut, and with the consistency of mushrooms like a walnut.
It is the most mysterious part of the human body, and yet it dominates the way we live our adult lives. It is the brain.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Cooperation Nation. Talking about the brain, talking about the body as the vessel of the brain and how we can change that body over into the transhumanist agenda and by introducing these horrible things into the body and transmutating everything. It's a horrible subject, but it's one of the most fascinating things I've ever seen. And again, it's the most important thing I think that anyone could be concentrating on now because, again, it's dealing with our well-being, our very humanity as we know it. You know, we always talk about the world changing or the world ending as we know it. Well, doesn't mean that it's going to end. It just means as we know it. And that's exactly what's happening to our bodies as we speak, as we sleep, unfortunately. And as you said, Patrick, we chose to be vaccinated because we really believed that these people wanted to help us. And now we know better. I got to say, first of all, let's just take a pause, everybody. Let's meditate for a moment. And let's give a holy crap out to the fact that all of this information is being stored in Israel. My God. I mean, if you read the threats that come out of that, I mean, talk about a terrorist nation. I mean, they're willing to nuke the whole world to keep Zionism alive. I mean, to keep the Holy Land in the control of, well, that's a whole other concept. But, I mean, my God, Israel, the Weizmann Institute, that's the scariest thing I've ever heard. This whole conversation should take a pause and reflect on that fact. That's the most scary fact I've heard in this whole thing, is that this Israel, my God. All right. Let's get back to the subject. So we're rabies and measles, huh?
Well, let's not, because at like 3 o'clock in the morning when I had to use toothpicks to keep my eyelids open, even though I was that, like, hammered to the screen that I had to finish my research, it's like, you know what this sounds like? The Doomsday Vault. The Gates-Monsanto Doomsday Vault. And I got a link for you. I didn't realize it was that simple, because I don't like giving links out over the internet, over the radio, because the internet addresses are so long. If you just do www.malacards, MALACARDS.org, you can research any freaking disease that you want to. Just you plug in a disease and it'll show you the tree, man.
Oh, yeah?
That's how weird it is. Okay, so when you were talking about Resident Evil, it's like, okay, Clint, were those movies for entertainment or were they just documentaries?
Predictive programming, my friend, because what do you do with a bunch of sick people? We no longer treat them, we shoot them in the head.
Right. And why not shoot them in the head? Because that's the part that don't work no more. Because let's look at this. You need to demyelinate the nerves to get these nanotechs to adhere to the cells by which they will interface. Because if you have the insulation on the wire, they would be floating around the body, but they wouldn't be able to affect their function. Because the weird thing about this materials science thing is when you get into nanotech circuits, they have an electral affinity for the conformation, which means the shape, and the charge of a cell structure that they want it to attach to. And so, fellow dude, this is like the freaking Borg on Star Trek. And, we're not talking about anything that is science fiction or what's the word? Speculation on our part. You go to something like Science Direct, or there's other websites out there where they talk about a little wheeled platform that they grafted a single mouse neuron to a circuit that runs a motor.
Yeah.
And that's my definition of hell. For a nerve cell to be bathed in a nutrient solution for as long as it can live, to run a little Hot Wheels toy back and forth. It hits an object and it backs off, and then it goes running again till it hits another object. And it just does that until, please let me die. This is the world that they're creating around us. And the thing that just fascinates me, Clint, and maybe you can help me with this, nobody's doing anything about it. They're talking about it. They're afraid of it. They fear the future, but they're not doing anything about it. I am curious, is this from your writing? Because I read a quote on the internet once that said, the only thing that you need to do is refer to what a parent should do when their child says to them, Mommy, Daddy, don't let Monsanto kill me. Is that something that you wrote a while back?
Well, I went to New York to speak to a group about vaccines, and I was saying, basically if a drug dealer came along and wanted to, inject your child with something that's basically going to addict him for the rest of his life, you'd automatically fight for your child's life. You'd fight for your own life. You'd do anything because they don't have a suit and a badge and a white coat on. But as soon as the paper comes delivered with the official school seal that says your child must be vaccinated before he can attend school, we cower. It's like the coward comes out of us. Oh my gosh, he's got a badge. He's got a piece of metal that says he's got authority, and therefore we must bend to his will somehow and submit our children to as you call, hell.
Thank you. It needs to be said, and that's why I get a kick out of having conversation with you, because you're not afraid to call it the way it is. So let's talk about Morgellons. I don't know the first thing about it, and I've got victims on my list, and they will tell me Some of them have gone to laboratories, and they had the things that come out of their body examined. And I said, well, what was in it? Well, pretty much stuff that couldn't be identified. And, okay, if we're not going to go into the space alien topic of that, some of them are speculating, well, it could be quantum dots. Well, I worked in the semiconductor industry, not in the years of quantum dots. I had to look that up. But back in the day, we were using gallium arsenide as the wafer substrate. You had to coat it with nitrides. There might be silicon, germanium, and other things present in there, that if these were circuits, and people claim that, they feel electrical charges, they feel these things growing. If the laboratory came back and said, maybe there's just carbon or silicon in there, or something, carbon and hydrogen and nothing else, the labs are either lying to them, that's the reality they have to come up with, or they don't have what they are postulating like a quantum dot, because quantum dot has to have the elements that make that circuit. Unless this technology is so far in advance of what is available to us as civilians that it's the next gen, and we don't even...
Sure, and that's the definition of most technology today. We have no idea what's out there. I mean, let's be honest. Let's be humble and admit it. So, we'll be back, folks. Stay with us.
Is this real, versus just ride? The world is like a ride. You think it's real, it's a ride. We can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice between fear and love. The world is like a ride.
Oh, folks, welcome back to Corporation Nation. We are talking with Patrick Jordan today, and Patrick, there's a couple questions I wanted you to get into, a couple topics I wanted to get you into, and I'll let you continue with the Morgellons, because I think that a lot of people are interested in that subject. I, in fact, have a cousin down in Florida that is just completely afflicted with it, and I can't get her to come up and try some of the frequency therapies that I've been recommending that she do, because I think that the frequency... the old technologies, that we're talking about with Truott and Sherry Edwards, I think that is the cure for Morgellons. And when I say cure, I mean you're basically just disrupting the capacity for them to operate. As you said, they're sort of this electronic circuit thing going on. But the two things I wanted to talk about before we've got two more segments here. My dog Hector is going to be 10 years old. He is a Great Dane. Great Danes don't live until they live about 7, 8 years old. Mine's 10 years old. And when I went to take him to the vets to get a bump removed from his forehead, the doctor said, well, we have to give him a rabies vaccine. Have to. It's the law. And I'm like, look. Do you think he lived? You yourself say you've only seen a Great Dane live to 7 years old. You've never seen a Great Dane past the year of 7. Mine is 10. I'm telling you I haven't vaccinated the dog since he was born. And you're going to tell me that you think I should have him vaccinated at 10 years old. Right? Right? Do you really think that that's logical or reasonable? The only thing that's different about my dog is that he hasn't been vaccinated. And he's living 3 years, 4 years, hopefully longer, and is very healthy and very content and very happy. He's got a happy dance. I mean, literally. All right. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about, and you mentioned this in your Plantea book about rabies and how it can be. People are asking in the chat room that can vaccines shed. In other words, if someone's vaccinated or something is vaccinated, can the effects of that be transmitted or somehow to people around those vaccinated people? I've heard that that's the case, but I wanted you to comment on that.
Well, that is the case. That is why they are mandated to give a rabies vaccine every year or every 3 years, because if you look at the weaponization, I'm one of those guys like you that says it the way it is. There's no reason to dance around this issue. They have full spectrum coverage. This is warfare. They are inserting a biological warfare agent into a pet population of a population of human beings where about 80% of all the people in the United States own pets. What a better way to get a biowarfare agent into the homes of people where they live with their pets 24 hours a day that are shedding. And the thing that you need to understand, this shocked me when I learned this from veterinaries. Mostly, you're not allergic to the hair or dander of a pet, typically a dog, because dogs are slobberers. It's the saliva. And I just outlined earlier in this broadcast that rabies has an affinity for two organ structures, the central nervous system and the salivary glands, because the salivary glands is how it gets transmitted. So let's just examine this. This is the domino effect, the 1, 2, 3. They are mandating something that is insane because Edgar March Cruikshank in 1889 said that if you want to eliminate rabies, the only thing you have to do is muzzle a dog. In England, back in his day, they would quarantine the animal for months, make sure that it wasn't rabid, before they even let it loose. There are ways of dealing with disease other than vaccines. So that's why I call it vaccine fraud, because this is a delivery system for a weapon.
Let me add, too, that in the old encyclopedias, before they started this ridiculous notion that you have to revaccinate, it specifically said the one thing, I mean, this was very, very straightforward, the one thing that will ruin people's comprehension of vaccination is if you actually tell them that you have to get revaccinated. That's going to be the one thing that's going to stop people from getting vaccinated, because it goes against all of the previous research or the whole concept of vaccination, that you're creating an antibody in the body. And, of course, what do we have now? Revaccination. I mean, it's patently ridiculous.
And it's to make sure that they got the bioweapon delivery in there. Because one of the things, I think it was with measles, is that those pesky maternal antibodies were in the baby's blood after it was born, and they couldn't get the measles vaccine to stick until after 12 weeks. So they know, and this is the complicity, this is the conspiracy of it. They know what they're doing. This isn't like, oh, we had altruistic intent and we made a mistake. No, that's why I call it vaccine fraud. These are biological weapons that they had planned out like hundreds of years in advance. And let me just address this topic of rabies. Yes, the animals will shed it. They'll shed it in their saliva. It was intended to get into you, because once you have it in the body, even if it is quiescent, because some people have had rabies for 15 years before it expressed. It's in the documentation. I may be wrong on the actual year span, but it's a ridiculous number before it actually showed up. Okay? So these things can lay dormant, and all they have to do is activate it with what? A frequency, a metal, a molecular switch. But here's the thing. In 1943, the Navy, the same people that sponsored the study of rabies aerosolization in a bat cave, they developed the flu mist. People think, oh, the flu mist is something new. University of California, under the Navy's funding, flu mist, 1943. This is why I say this is a long-term plan, because what are they looking for? They're looking for aerosolization of biological vectors. So then we go into the 1960s, and they're doing it with rabies. Now, how do we know that prions aren't filtering down from chemtrails? How do we know Morgellons isn't filtering down from chemtrails? Well, in 1974, I think there was a hole in the ozone. Wonder how that happened. Because as I was pulling back the layers of just how the heck do you stop Jack Bauer's disease, ozone destroys prions, destroys them. What better way to get a planetary deployment of, because chemtrails are everywhere, man, I've seen them on the satellite photos. They're everywhere. We're talking continental coverage. If they are putting in things like Morgellons and Prions in chemtrails, the last thing you would want to do is have that pesky planetary defense system of ozone breaking down your hard-earned work of creating a global plague.
Well, that is a theory I have not heard before, and that's very interesting.
It came from you, Clint, because you provided the material on SOD, superoxide dismutase, being a way of deforming other proteins in the body. And I thought, all we have to do, Clint, is take that pattern, because that's what I do, pattern recognition. You take that pattern of disabling the body's ability to handle oxygen radicals, and you apply it to the planetary system, which is a living organism. And if you disable that ability to recycle oxygen radicals, then you can infect the planet, vaccinate the planet.
Well, okay, so let's then, I mean, that makes sense. I hope it makes sense to my audience. Let's get back to Morgellons, because Morgellons is truly an unknown, and like I said, I have a cousin who has it down in Florida, and I've tried over and over to get her to come up here and actually get on this machine that we have up here. That's, it literally is a machine designed to ozonate the blood. And I just can't get it up. I'm dying to actually get with someone like either Sherry Edwards or someone to actually start trying to, what's the correct word? I can't say cure, that would be illegal. I can't say heal. To electrically charge these things and charge the blood and actually let the body heal itself through the ozonization and of course the oxygenation. One of the things that Truott actually did was hook up a cannula to people's nose with Brown's gas. Which was, Brown's gas is burnable, actually. It's water that you can burn. So you put that with ultra-pure water, and you're literally oxygenating the blood. And then you're ozonated at the same time. So I know there's a cure for this. We'll be back.
Hey, neighbor. Welcome again to this neighborhood. I'd like to show you something. You know what this is? Maybe if I press this button.
There are so many things to learn about in this world, and so many people who can help us learn, and so many people who can help us learn.
Did you ever grow anything in the garden of your mind? In the garden of your mind. You can grow ideas in the garden of your mind. In the garden of your mind. It's good to be curious about many things. You can think about things and make believe. All you have to do is think. You can think about things and make believe. All you have to do is think, and they'll grow.
Welcome back, folks, to the Corporation Nation. Let's hit it home, my friend. Let's really tear down this Morgellons thing. I don't know if you're the end-all, be-all to say what Morgellons is, but I think you're a pretty good go-to guy for this. So what the heck is this thing?
Well, I say in Kingdom Plante, I don't know. And one of the reasons is the Morgellons people that feed me information are going to laboratories for actually atomic furnace analyzation of the things that come out of their body, and they're coming back with inconclusive data. And this goes to the heart of the rabies thing. Where did rabies come from? Because if you can find out what it really is, okay, negative strand RNA, who cares? Where did it come from? What is its transmission route? Not from the bite of a bat or a dog. Where did it come from? Did it come from the soil? Did it come from a meteorite, shedding weird crap that came from space that a tiny little mite ingested? The mite bit the bat bit the dog. Where did it come from? Because if we can't interdict it in that transmission chain, we will never get ahead of it. And this actually is the point of, okay, let's say for the sake of argument, you found a therapy that was effective for Morgellons. What would be the next disease that they invent? Because they can invent these with tabletop gene sequencers. What has to happen is this madness has to stop at the source. And I'm not saying that we should not work for the remediation, because we can't say cure. But there will always be the next thing. It's a war of attrition. But what you need to keep in mind is something like DARPA. They always, when they invent something like artificial life, they invent a kill switch. So there is always a way to shut these things down. Always. They have to protect themselves from their own weapons.
That is a common question, of course. How can they be doing this and poisoning the planet and poisoning everything if it's poisoning themselves? Well, and my answer to that is simply that they know that there's a transmutation going on with the human body, and they're all for it because they're transhumanists. So they don't care about poisoning their children or all of that, because, like you say, they can treat. Why did Jordan? Was Michael Jordan? What happened with him?
Right. He was HIV positive, but he did not develop AIDS. Is that?
Right. Well, why is that?
Or was that was Magic Johnson? I'm sorry.
Magic Johnson. Yeah. I mean, and it's obvious because he has unlimited funding to get the right treatment. I mean, that's the bottom line. All these stars in Hollywood. One of the things I learned in Hollywood, they're all taking human growth hormone.
Oh my God.
They're all taking human growth hormone. This is how they stay, quote unquote, looking young.
I had no idea, and that's derived from cadavers from I forget the brain structure.
Yeah, and bovine. They also.
Oh, really? Wow.
And that's one of the things I've uncovered that actually is a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. Because anytime you're injecting those foreign proteins, you got prions in there.
So either they have an antidote, which is probably as simple as grabbing some, and folks don't do this. I'm exaggerating. They have, and I won't say it then. They're just going to the grocery store and pulling things off the shelf that they mix together, and that's the antidote, and it could be that.
What about hydrogen peroxide?
Well, see, this is what we have to examine. The oxygen radical. The guy that was attributed to discovering vitamin C, Albert Szent-Györgyi, Hungarian dude, said that life cannot exist without oxygen radicals. And what is the agenda today? You must antioxidate. You must have antioxidants. Why? Because they took out, as you showed us, the superoxide dismutase. They turned it into a prion trigger. So we have to antioxidate just to keep down the symptoms that we all got kuru. We'd all be, liquefied if we weren't inundated by antioxidants, whether we wanted them or not, because these processes are already started in our bodies. It's not like, your relative has Morgellons. Everybody has it. It's whether you're expressing it or not. It's not whether or not we've got prions in our body, weaponized prions. Everybody has them. Are they expressing yet?
Are you suggesting that we are all mad cows?
I am. I'm not putting a limit on it because, when they started the 1943, Clint, flu mist, and it's being marketed right now as the new thing. Mm-hmm. And you wouldn't believe how many people are reporting to me that they have lesions in their nose, and these are people that don't take vaccines. They eat organic food. Where are the nose lesions coming from? Spontaneous nose lesions. And you read the flu mist insert, and it says, if you get this vaccine, you should not be around the elderly, the young, or people with immune compromise for 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
It's like, well, back to Crookshank. Quarantine them. They should be in prisons right now. The people that give the vaccines and the people that took the vaccines. They should be in the FEMA camps, man.
Good point. I mean, it's actually a true statement. I hate to say it, but unfortunately, that's the majority of the population. We unvaccinated. I mean, I'm vaccinated as well, of course, in my youth. Not since it's been about 10, 15 years since I've done any of it, but we, the unvaccinated, are actually being harmed by the zombie class vaccination class. I mean, that's the truth. And they're worried about us.
Yeah. That's how they frame it, because everything is opposite day.
Yeah. Well, hey, Patrick, we are coming to the end. I got a couple minutes, but thank you again. And, we should probably continue to do this as we both expand our knowledge base on all of this stuff. I've got a couple of research things that I'll be releasing here pretty soon when I get the chance, and definitely got to do this again.
Looking forward to it. Always a pleasure to talk with you.
Yeah, I suppose now, it's funny, we haven't talked actually offline here. We haven't actually talked off air, I mean, and the reason I haven't actually just called you up to shoot the proverbial, is because I didn't want to. I wanted it all to come out on the show, but yeah, maybe now we'll actually, speak like real people.
Okay.
Oh.
Shooting the mad bull.
Yeah. Well, I think both of our conclusions here is that this all revolves around the absolutely suppressed technologies of both ozonation, oxygenation, and frequency, energy, basically, left over from your Royal Rifes and Hulda Clark has her Zapper machine, and Truott has his machine. The photon sound beam is what it's called, and they're out there. And I really, it sounds to me like what needs to happen is that all these people that are studying frequencies, they're all doing it outside of each other. We all need to get together in some sort of foundation or something, and literally try to start scientifically trying to balance people's afflictions. I don't know how to say it without being charged by the FDA. But yeah, it sounds like that the ancient or the old, century-old technologies that have been suppressed are the answer to this. So, all right. Well, Patrick, his website is vaccinefraud.com, where all of his books are. A lot of books, actually. We'll see you next time, my friend.
Thank you.
We're at the end of the show. Take care, folks.